Hi everyone, my name is Mackenzie, and today I'll be covering the Unit 2A discussion post. So I first want to say that reviewing these 3 chapters over the past 2 weeks, I was a bit overwhelmed. I believe like 30 new theories were introduced throughout these chapters, and it was a lot to digest. But I pushed through and reviewed the chapters and of course the content posted in D2L, and I want to start with I found the most to say about chapter 4, so I'll start there. Chapter 4 discussed the emergence of the media effects trend, which largely took over for mass society theory, and instead focused on the effects of media on audiences and stuff. And there were a few different theories that were placed under the umbrella of media effects, and one of these includes limited effects theory. Limited effects was developed by Paul Lazarsfeld, and this theory largely, it had two main things that I want to talk about. First of all, it said that media doesn't have these huge effects on people as we may think it does. In fact, it has minimal and maybe even some positive effects, instead of where mass society theory largely looked at huge effects that would be negative. The discussion questions for chapter 4 first asked about limited effects theory, and they asked, what do you find most useful about limited effects theory? Oh, that was the second point I was going to make, is that limited effects theory largely justified not regulating media. So I'm sure that the big dudes, rich dudes who were media producers or who funded or made the media, were happy to hear that it wouldn't be regulated or censored because of the minimal effects it has on people, that so it shouldn't be regulated or censored. But back to the discussion question about limited effects theory, it says, what do you find most useful about it? Do you get your information directly from media, or do you rely on friends? Do social media increase the likelihood that friends will influence your decisions? And can you think of an example when media caused an important change in your life or society? So I'll answer that one, and then I'll also lead into question 2 that it asks about, what do you find most problematic about limited effects theory? So first we'll talk about some of the pros. Like I mentioned, it justifies not regulating media. So I personally get a large amount of my information from family and friends, but also the media. I would say, of course, whenever there's an important thing going on, such as an election, I would say that almost everyone is tuned in to watch the debates and to make an informed decision based on their own morals and beliefs. I think social media definitely increases the likelihood that friends affect our decisions. Of course, because when you post anything on social media, it's, unless you're private and only have a very small trusted group of people on it, if you have a public page, then anyone is welcome to comment and share their opinions on your thoughts, on your opinions. Everyone's allowed to say whatever they want. Can you think of an example when media caused an important change in your life or society? Yeah, just in the past 2 weeks, I could say that there's been a large effect of media on people. I think it's been constant. It's been heavily applied to today's circumstances. And then what do you find most problematic about limited effects theory? I think the biggest thing of that would just be that if there are no regulations, or if it's believed that media has no effect on people, then that could be problematic. It could cause people to put out stuff that harms others just because they think it won't. And then also it mentioned in part of the chapter that a con of this is that even the smallest limited effects can have profound repercussions. I think in the notes our professor provided to us, it gave a few examples of how 1% of change in an industry can have profound effects. I also wanted to mention that at some point in chapter 5 mentioned that minimal effects of TV, and it talked about political polarization. And I wanted to say that I feel like this is something very current to what we're facing right now. It says in our notes that considering the polarization in the 1960s, there were violent protests and that were common, and there were even political assassinations. And I think that we're all aware of the most recent political assassination and the very widespread effects that it's had all throughout the world. And this is largely because it was so public and seen by so many individuals on social media. So yeah, I think we're seeing a huge polarization today, much like we did back then, of between the left and the right, and between the people and the government, and just constantly fighting what pops up on our social media. Everything is that you see is very polarizing, or like reinforcement theory suggests, in our algorithms we'll see stuff over and over that just reaffirms our own opinions and beliefs, and we're not really seeing the other side of things, where if I were on the opposite end of the spectrum, my algorithm would look completely different. And that's just something that we're all hopefully we see a change in that, at some point. Thank you.